Language is something that is really, really cool and important in video games. It's a new element that adds a lot to its world building and lore, but it can be a really good weapon to bring a certain emotion to the player. I think Final Fantasy X is a great example on this. They use 3 different scripts across the entirety of the continent of Spira, but there's also a completely different spoken language by the Albet group, which is a minority of people that live in Spira. They don't view themselves as the rest of Spira. They view themselves as sort of a rebel group. And this element of language added on top, where we, the player, can't even understand it, at least in the beginning of the game, it really helps to add up that feeling of who the hell are these people? They are foreigners. I don't feel comfortable with them. And I think it works really well. Now, ICO is also a very interesting game because they've also developed a specific language to be used by both Yorda and the Queen. I find this language so interesting and curious that I kind of wanted to do a video about it. Now, Yorda's language seems to be both an ideogram and an alphabet. An ideogram is when a symbol is associated with a concept. You have these modern sort of ideograms. When you look at, for example, this one, you can instantly recognize what it's trying to say. It's trying to say that in this location, it is forbidden to smoke. And that's kind of exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing, for example, that this symbol right here means kneel. This letter Y means yoke. And if you don't know what a yoke is a wooden beam used between a pair of oxen or other animals to enable them to pull together on a load when working in pairs, as oxen usually do. And this is actually a really interesting thing from the world of ICO, because Yorda and ICO feel like they have a yoke on top of them, essentially. Without one or the other, they cannot advance in the story. But apart from this, it seems like all of these symbols actually form an alphabet that has its origins on the Latin alphabet of A, B, and C. Now, the person who did this language was Kouto. He was a former Team ICO developer. I'm not entirely sure if he's on Gen Design right now, but from the quick research that I've done, it feels like he based himself heavily on the romanization of Japanese, also dubbed Romaji. Now, as you can see here, I made a brief description saying the romanization of Japanese is the process of writing Japanese words and sounds using the Latin alphabet instead of Japanese characters. There's this great video made by a YouTube channel called Yorda's Language that only has 2 videos. Whoever did this clearly just made the YouTube channel just to showcase how the Yorda's language works, and I think they did a pretty good job, I'm not gonna lie. The first time that we play the game, we get the subtitles in Yorda's language, but if you complete the game and you go back and you replay the game in a second playthrough, you actually get the subtitles in English or whatever language your game is predefined. Hence, this became the basis most likely for that dude to try and decipher what the basis for this language is. We're going to try and understand like how to get to this result specifically, okay? This result. So we're going from the English version all the way to here, okay? Now, the thing is, if we would translate in Romaji, this text right here, who are you, how did you get here? We would get Dare anata doko kara aite no kita. I'm not Japanese. Please don't question my Japanese here. Now, what Kuwabara actually did right after this is he put every single word backwards. So instead of dare, you get esad. Instead of hanata, you get hatana. Instead of doko, you get okod, harak, etia, on. And after this, he actually went out of his way to take out some of the letters and even changing, for example, here, the word quite heavily in order to get esad, hatan, oktar, eti, on. And when we use the alphabet, we actually get this result. Now, this seems probably a little bit complicated for a lot of you. It is to me, I'm not gonna lie. I feel like this is probably easier to understand if you know even a little bit of Japanese, mostly because you can probably associate the words a lot better. I'm obviously taking what this guy is saying in this video in face value because it just seems logical to me what they present. Now, I was actually trying to figure out like what exactly were the inspirations to actually make this alphabet. And at least from the research that I've been doing, I'm kind of missing putting here kanji and Mandarin. Again, it's kind of like everything from Team ICO and Gen Design. They base themselves on a bunch of different things in order to then just mix them up in a goddamn soup and get to a great result that feels like it's something completely different. There's definitely some similarities at the very least that we can draw from, for example, the Anglo-Saxon runes. I want to bring you attention to this rune right here. And you can actually see that this rune, it just feels like they at least got a basis of that rune over here, right? But again, it's so different. Like it has nothing to do with this whatsoever. I do actually feel like there's also some similarities with the Sumerian cuneiform, because the Sumerians do this thing where, you know, there's a repetition of the lines, of linear lines, right? They kind of do this a lot. Or even this, right? You can kind of see that here on a lot of these letters, like over here on the S, or even here on the R, right? Or even here on the W here, right? There's quite a lot of repetition of lines, like linear lines, like horizontal or vertical lines everywhere. But honestly, I think the closest language that I've seen that is very similar is probably hieroglyphs from Egypt. The symbols feel a lot more organic in their nature. And I think that's why I feel like hieroglyphs are very similar to Yorda's language. Like, you know, if you look at Yorda's language here, for example, you don't even need to look here, right? You can tell that this is some sort of insect. You can tell that this probably means like bird or something. You can tell that this feels like an elderly person. You can understand that this, for example, the letter K is someone kneeling down. All of these elements feel organic in a way. It's kind of like here with hieroglyphs, like this is a bird, right? This is like a snake or a worm, you know? This feels like it's a hand, you know? In both of these language, hieroglyphs and Yorda's language are both an ideogram and an alphabet also. There are a couple of things that define this language in my opinion. The main one is definitely the sphere with a dot in the middle. That you see that represented all across the language. And they either represent, from what I understand, an animal or a human. Even though there is this R that also has a dot, but you know, and this Y also here that doesn't really seem to be representing a human, or maybe it is, who knows. There's also the thing that I mentioned of lines, like repetition of lines, either or in an horizontal way, or in a vertical way, or in this like sort of weird curvy shape here. Like you can see in the R, we can see in the S, and the W, kinda in the F, and the C. But there's also letters like the T, Z, and N that have this very peculiar thing, which is a line that then everything comes from that line. Everything is connected to that line. Nothing is separate. You know, you wouldn't have like, you don't have like something like this and then a line outside of it. You know what I mean? Which is something that is predominant, I believe, in the Anglo-Saxon runes. Even though you have this one right here, kind of screwing up my argument. But you know what I mean. I think the curious thing about this language is, where do they actually use this language? This language is mostly used when Yorda speaks to us or the queen. And the queen actually, whenever she talks to Yorda, she speaks in that language. But the queen, when she speaks to ICO, she actually speaks the same language as ICO. Now, this is very curious because the queen speaks both languages. Yorda only speaks her language, and ICO speaks his language as well, okay? I don't exactly know what to do with this, but I kind of want you to stick with that idea and let me show you some other stuff first. So, is this alphabet used anywhere around the game by any chance? And the answer is actually yes. This alphabet is actually used as ideograms in the game. And this is the main example here. It's actually used in these like sarcophagus things that all the horned kids are in. but I actually have the original texture over here that has everything a lot cleaner for us to see. I've managed to at least detect a couple of symbols that are used here. Over here, we have the letter K, this symbol right here. We also have the letter I and the letter F right here, and this symbol. This one right here. Now this means that these symbols are actually used as ornaments to convey an idea. And it seems like the idea, from what I'm understanding, is that you have two dudes kneeling down and giving an offering over here of a child to this, whatever this is. To me, this actually feels the base of a plant, right? That has like a little seed coming out, even though I would argue this is probably a representation of horns, right? And then you have here on top the letter Y that means yoke, which is really interesting. I do actually believe we also have the letter W here somewhat, even though I can't really understand like exactly what this is. It feels like there are fangs coming out, like teeth with some eyes or something, but I don't understand what this is, to be honest with you. I have also managed to identify some things here like this right here, right? It feels like it's this particular symbol. We also see symbols like this, which are kind of representative of the head of someone, I guess, but I can't really identify what this is. There's also like this triangle shape that I have no clue what this is, or whatever this whole symbol is that is not present here whatsoever. So my point is, I feel like we can identify some letters or some symbols here, but it's hard to identify all of them. I feel like it's impossible, really. Like, I can't even identify what exactly this right here is. It feels like it's two humans connected or something, but it's really hard to tell, I'm not gonna lie. And a curious thing about this is that, at least from my research, this is practically the only place where we see these symbols being represented in the entirety of the castle. There are a couple of other examples that I found, like these ones, right? Like the Queen's Sword also has symbols. These idol statues also seem to have different symbols all around, or even the elevator actually has two symbols right here, right? But none of them are actually part of this alphabet. None of them are. Like, if you actually go, like for example, this one right here, you can actually see that this shape is something like this, right? With two bars on the side. But if we actually take a look at the symbol again from the alphabet, it looks like this. It is somewhat different. They're not the same, and I'm not sure why. And you can see that in multiple occasions, I feel like. For example, this letter O feels like it's probably the one that's most similar to this symbol right here. And this symbol, what I'm seeing at the very least, is this. Seeing a head, and then three lines coming out, and then maybe like a little anchor or something here. I'm not sure. But it's completely different from this. This is, you know, vertical, right? Like, and the lines are like squiggly or something. It's so odd. This is very confusing to me. Like, the only place that actually has these characters being used is that room with the sarcophagus. The rest of the castle does not use them. There's also this great little video by Mystic Code where he grabs this familiar pattern that we see from, you know, ICO and Shadow of the Colossus, but specifically in ICO, he pointed out how in multiple occasions you can see this pattern everywhere around ICO, and he goes to show you exactly where that pattern is. This is the thing, like, this has nothing to do with what I'm trying to explore here. I'm trying to explore Yorda's language and how it's used in the game, and it's used, honestly, very sporadically. I think my whole point with this is there seems to be a disconnection between this language within the castle. This room right here is the only room that actually has the language of Yorda being used as ornaments and ideograms to showcase to us a concept, an idea. The rest of the castle also has a lot of elements that use this language but this language does not feel like it's the same language. It feels like it's altered, or at the very least, it's using the basis of this language in a different way. And to be dead honest with you, I don't really know what to do with this. The only thing that I can do is speculate, really, because we don't really have enough information. There seems to be a parallel here that can be made between, for example, China and Japan, especially on the writing systems. We do know that people from China, from mainland China, came to Japan. It was a long, long time ago. And so what happens is the writing system of Japanese deviated a lot from the Chinese one over time. You can see here, for example, from this image, you have, traditional Chinese and kanji, right? It's actually quite easy to identify some of the difference at the very least, but as a foreigner, identifying the differences from, for example, traditional Chinese, kanji, Korean hanja, for us, or at least for me specifically, sometimes it's actually hard to identify the differences, right? I really need to look for the differences. For you guys, for Asian people out there, it's probably like super easy to identify, right? But I think that's probably what he's trying to do here. He's probably trying to showcase that this room, the sarcophagus room, is a room that feels like it's very isolated from everything else around the castle. And so maybe since this area is so isolated throughout the years, decades, and centuries, a discrepancy between this room and the rest of the castle and potentially the people that inhabit it began to become bigger and bigger, even though it seems like it was just simple alterations, at least when it comes to the language. I don't know. I have no idea, but I feel like there's something here that feels similar to the story of China, Japan, Korea, and everything. This is an image that was made by I even point out here, Nomad is crazy in the best way, because my God, he did an amazing job with this image. This image is an aerial view of the entirety of the map of ICO. And the crazy thing about this is that Nomad Colossus actually took probably a ton of photos. I don't even know how he took these photos and collaged them all together in order to create this image. You can actually see the maps and everything. It's an amazing image, actually. I love this image today. I found one thing very curious about ICO, which is, I've spoken a lot about how these previous games feel like they have this whole theme of light and shadow, and how light is being represented in these games, especially through water and mirrors, right? And it's kind of curious because if you actually go and play the game, this whole castle and the electricity that is inside it feels like it's actually all ran by water. And the cool thing is, in order to open this gate, you actually need to turn on these two sort of light beam reflectors, whatever they are, in order to open this gate. So you can go all the way to the southest point of the map, right? And in the north, what is all the way up in the north? You have shadow. You have darkness over here. This is where the queen is, right? I think this concept, he brought this all the way to Shadow of the Colossus at the very least. You come from the north all the way to the castle, and then you end up going all the way to the south in order to defeat the 16th Colossus. I don't know. There's something there at the very least that is really interesting. I think at the end of the day, though, the main objective of this language, I think it's definitely to bring a sort of emotion to the player. A sort of emotion that, you look at this character, Yorda, speaking, and it gives you a sense of like, who is this character? Like, we don't know anything of her, and we can't really communicate with her in a normal sense. And I think that actually helps to bring a much more emotional impact to the player. But because the focus is not really the dialogue interactions that we have with her, but rather the gameplay mechanics that we have to do with her. And I think it works really well. It deepens an emotional connection. And I do think it brings a little bit more honest to whatever this world is. That's about it. If you like this video, subscribe and have a good one. See ya.